So I guess I'm going to talk through a bit of a narrative and then hand over to Kate, who's going to continue with her own perspectives, and then we're going to have a conversation, maybe talk to Corinne and also take any questions. So I loved Monsieur Lecourtier's statement there that artists are responsible for the pillars of the French identity and also drivers of the economy. And an interesting, I will be quoting Warhol a little later on this idea of things that people don't need associated with the arts. I guess I wanted to start off with a personal perspective and a bit about my own journey, sort of between the worlds of art and creativity and business. By starting off with a reflection on a great comment by or a great insight from Brian Eno. He was speaking at the John Peel lecture last September in the British Museum. And the subject, what is art, was what is art? He was trying to actually put a crisp, succinct definition on the notion of what art is and why we are compelled to create. And he said, well, art is actually everything you don't have to do. He said, we all have to eat, but we don't have to eat a baked Alaska. Yeah? We have to move, but we don't have to dance the rumba or the foxtrot. And sort of putting it out there that no matter if you're rich or poor, the human condition is compelled to embroider and to create and innovate. Now, why is that? Certainly as a young photographer, musician and writer, I started out thinking that I wouldn't get paid for what I liked doing. I couldn't imagine a world where I could actually transcend the stuff that I had to study and regimentally absorb and actually get paid for what I was just compelled to do as a human being. So I started taking photographs at the age of 13, and I was lucky to benefit from a pair of parents who were photographers themselves and who taught me how to print in the darkroom. And I first took on photography as the act, I guess, of grasping through a 24mm lens, a crystallization of the world as I saw it then. But when I was 15, I took this photograph in Rose Bay in Sydney Harbour, and I actually got paid for it. This was astonishing for a 15-year-old. It made me a hero at school, but also got me published in the first ever photo annual for Surfing World. And so I continued taking photographs for compositional sense and also, in a certain sense, early photojournalism. And when I actually got to France in the early 1980s and found myself in the middle of one Frenchman told me it's actually our annual summer sport. The annual student, anarchist and police riots, in my business suit, while the other photographers were around me in flak jackets and motorcycle helmets. But I managed to capture a fantastic, intriguing sense of images around the dynamism, the energy, the chaos of this situation. And even in the sort of the midst of the photojournalistic principle of actually capturing the moment for posterity in the first draft of history, I was also composing the fine art photograph. And this one I particularly like because of the reflective elements of the feminine shapes of the building, the helmet, the shield, and then the building again reflected in the helmet, contrasted with the absolute look of terror if you look closely at the policemen's faces. And so I continue sort of broadening this idea of what you want to do with opportunities to actually exhibit it in Barcelona, London, and Sydney. And just the act of actually wanting to tell people stories, whether it's a whimsical sort of story that needs to be told because you want to know what lies behind these people, wherever they come from, what are their motives, what makes them tick. To a point where I was noodling around with photographs in a design sense for a business I was working for, Deloitte. And mocking up what I thought might be an interesting advertising campaign, the intersection of strategy, compliance, risk management, and governance. And it turned out the leadership of the business was actually more interested in using these versions of the photographs than the more airbrushed, photoshopped and staged versions of the photographs they had already paid for. So this became the element, whether through the authenticity or the grittiness of the photojournalism, it became the actual campaign. And it started a sort of a train of marketing communications at Deloitte that was an instrument in what was a pretty phenomenal business turnaround. I mean, through innovation, through creative thinking, through design thinking principles, the business has over the last 10 years doubled in size, tripled in revenue, and leapfrogged from a distant fourth in its sector to number 2. Now, you can't put all that down to creativity, but you can to open-mindedness, I guess. And where I start from with Eno and his idea of the unnecessary, it starts to bother me because it implies an almost a frippery, an inessential quality to art, an embroidering of the inessential. And when I was thinking of it as the theme for this talk a few months ago, until I went and saw Warhol and Weiwei in Melbourne, and this quote stuck with me. You know, Andy Warhol said, you know, the hippies used to have a problem with making money out of art. You know, business is bad, making money is bad. And he said, well, actually, business is the highest form of art. I started off as a commercial artist, and I wanted to end up as a business artist, because business is the most fascinating apotheosis, if you like, of art. And art is business, and good art is good business. Good business is the best art. You know, when you think of the journey that artists have made, the worlds of art and creativity and business and politics are actually converging. The long march is almost over. I put it down to a metaphor of technology. You know, my first job out of college was working in a big IT company in the days when technology meant a mainframe in the basement. Every week or so, you would fire up the computer, clank it over, and run payroll on this big mainframe, and that was technology. Now we carry around technology in our pocket. It is the air we breathe, the water we swim in. You know? It is part of the way we do business. Marketing has followed that trend, you know, that long march. Creativity is now at the end of that journey. It's actually impressing upon business that the best opportunities for differentiation, for enhanced customer experience, and therefore productivity, efficiency, and profitability are through creativity. We know that good society, you know, efficient society, one that serves its communities well as providing good environments for investment and sustainability, a good progress comes through creative thinking, you know, innovation, and the confluence of various disciplines. The problem is that creativity, by its nature, lies at the edge. You know, by definition, creativity is the shock of the new. We have no context to measure its value. And therefore, it's very difficult for artists and cultural organizations to ascribe a tangible value to what they do. Conversely, we know that art is critical to societal progress. You know, the best innovations start off almost as artistic, out there ideas, and they frequently follow the process of becoming modified, evolved, and structured as great ideas for architecture, for management systems, for IT apps, and so forth. I would go so far as to say that Monsieur Le Courtier, talking about the driver of economic value in France, creativity is critical to Australians' identity and sense of themselves. It's also critical to our economic progress. I'm going to go quickly through a couple of examples of where I'm seeing it happen. At Deloitte, with Deloitte Access Economics, we were recently asked by the Communications Council to actually have a look at the value of advertising in Australia. And advertising is obviously a great metaphor for the science and art, the point at which it meets. So we started out by looking at the actual tangible economic contribution advertising makes, by the amount of money it earns, the revenue it turns over, the number of people it employs, and so forth. But we found that, you know, with $12 billion actually being spent on advertising, it actually generates $40 billion worth of wealth in Australia. And that's more than the value of the internet itself. it not only drives job creation. For every one job, and these are ads that we've created for the report, by the way. They're just sort of ways of bringing the statistics to life. We know that brands good advertising adds value to brands. There's a value differential there, but it also creates jobs. For every one in advertising, there are two more in the supply chain, and an additional one created by the additional impact of advertising. More prosaically, though, it creates success for Australia. It helps us make the right choices, choose the right tools, vote for the right parties, we hope, lead healthier lives. Yeah? That in turn has a saving on time, on health, a number of different areas where advertising has a knock-on effect. The act of creating great ideas, delivering them and influencing outcomes through people's perceptions has a tangible value. It's almost as though, and this is a great New Yorker cover I have at home by Bruce Kaplan. It used to be that the arts and business world didn't speak the same language. That they forever torn asunder by an inability to speak the vernacular of business or of creativity. But over time, we are seeing the barbarians storming the citadel, if you like, to the point where they are best friends. And we're seeing, particularly in the area of academia, the intersection of long-term business thinking and the opportunity to get the best out of future fine arts and design students. At UNSW Art and Design, where I'm a faculty advisory board member, they're doing some amazing things. There's a fantastic thing called the GLAM Alliance, the brainchild of the very enlightened Dean Ross Harley, which is an alliance between Sydney's galleries, libraries, archives and museums, looking at fomenting intensity of knowledge exchange between these institutions to in turn benefit them and benefit business. UNSW are also partnering with companies like Royal Dalton, a 200-year-old company, which is looking to young, innovative designers for future ideas. And Royal Dalton has an award at UNSW, where the winner is given an internship in the UK headquarters, and their best work is actually used in the production line of Royal Dalton. And so too with Rug Up, a designer rugs has an agreement with UNSW to have an exhibition and a winner every year, where for the last 8 years the winner has been made into a rug. But those are decorative arts. UNSW is also working with ResMed, which is focused on producing products for sleep apnea and respiratory problems. And UNSW design students are asked to enhance the customer experience, the user experience, and actually enhance the product design, which once again has that knock-on effect of getting, in the end game, more productive human beings, because they're not going to work half asleep or troubled by these. So this idea of art for art's sake sort of bothers me, and I think the best example of this was this study we did for the Sydney Opera House 2 years ago, where we were asked to actually put an economic value on what the Opera House does for Sydney and Australia. And our response was, well, actually, we can talk about economic value, but it's actually worth much more. We know that it's much more valuable to the average Australian. But we started off by measuring the amount of tourist dollars it generates, and the fact that 88% of Chinese tourists cite the Opera House as the key reason they're visiting Sydney. The retail precinct of shops, galleries, and restaurants. The Arts Centre itself, the people who are employed within the Opera House, and the 7 member organisations like Bell Shakespeare, Opera Australia, Sydney Symphony. And we came up with the figure of $775 million immediate dollars it generates. But we know the Opera House was worth much more in brand value, not only to Sydney, but to Australia. And why? Well, this guy is from the Northern Territory. He's never been to the Opera House. He's a true blue Aussie, and he loves the fact that we've got an Opera House, even though he doesn't think he'll ever come here. Yeah? This guy is prepared through our research to pay $6.70 out of his annual tax dollar to ensure that the Opera House continues to exist. New South Welshmen are prepared to pay $6.50, cheapskates that we are. People in Victoria probably don't want to pay for it, but the idea here is that there is a consumer surplus. And these supposedly intangible values for the benefit of arts have to be measured. We also found that someone seeing Radiohead at the Sydney Entertainment Centre was prepared to pay several dollars more to actually see the same band at the Sydney Opera House. And so once you actually start talking about the true value of the Opera House, you come up with what we call the iconic value of the institution, of the creative institution, which is a bigger brand than the iPhone and is intrinsic to the Australian identity. And that iconic value was worth $2.74 billion. Add that to the actual figures I added before, plus the ticket sales that they generate, and the differential, the value add of the consumer choice. You add that then to the digital value, the fact that people are currently getting the benefit of streamed live music from the Opera House for 2 or 3 cents a piece. They're prepared to pay $5.90 for the experience. You've got a $59 million incremental value there. So although the Opera House generates around a couple of $1 billion, its actual value to Australia is $4.6 billion, more than twice that. So that says a lot about the creativity dividend, if you like. And it also suggests that as in the arts community, we have to work harder to ascribe a value to what we do. It's no longer enough to say it's art for art's sake, and it's stuff that we don't have to do. The human condition is to progress, to evolve, to improve. That's where the creative spirit is engendered. Creativity is big business. Look at Vivid. Look what Vivid has done to the middle of our year. A creative exposition has actually created an event out of nothing, which generates millions and millions of dollars. If we can actually get creativity working at the heart of the most wicked problems that government and business faces, sustainability, environmental issues, health and poverty, then that is a value that we simply can't put a figure on. So thanks for that. I hope that was provocative, and I look forward to, with you, to hearing Kate's position.
Thank you very much, David. Good morning, everybody. Unfortunately and unintentionally, I think I've done this again. Apparently, this is the dress I wear when I'm giving big speeches. Anyway, I'm Kate Dezarnaulds, and this is my why, valuing creativity one partnership at a time. I'm a business development consultant in the arts and cultural industries. I'm the head of partnerships at TEDx Sydney, where from a home base of Sydney, our brave suite of partners allow me to test my theories against the backdrop of a fragment of one of the world's hottest brands. I sit on the board of 2 organisations that sit at polar opposites of the cultural spectrum, Underbelly Arts, an emerging arts festival, and the National Trust of New South Wales. I try very hard to live a quiet life at least half of the week on my home on the south coast of New South Wales, and I do a lot of driving. And whilst I'm driving, I do a lot of thinking about ideas of authenticity in marketing, in art, in business, in architecture, in health, in food, in culture. Mostly fantasising about going back to university to do some sort of PhD on how we have lost its pulse. This talk was written from my office in my garden, looking at this view. I think you can see where the schizophrenic kind of dislocation happens for me between an authentic life in the country and this crazy world that we live in culture in the cities. It's been great fun working with the team at Culture Business, framing this talk. David and I hadn't met before. We had a few fantastic conversations which have really shaped and reshaped some of my thinking, and I think resolved some long-standing kind of hesitations that I've had, and so I'm going to lay it all bare for you here this morning. It was really hard to figure out how to do this talk, basically. There are about 4 versions of it that I could have done, so I've chosen to give you a high-level snapshot. Hopefully there are opportunities to continue the conversation at the conference or online afterwards about the things that pick up with your interests. The first part was mostly around definitions, the nature of good, definitions of art these days, a series of rabbit holes that I mostly have resisted falling into. The second was about the future of art, how macro trends are affecting the arts, our institutions, and how we engage with culture, and how all of these affect the sort of partnerships that will be constituted in the future. The third is a more sort of standard speech about trends in partnership, a look at the industry and an overview of what's coming next. My role at TEDx Sydney gives me a seat kind of right on the edge where I get to look at what's happening in the sector and hopefully unpack it, what it might mean for broader cultural contexts. And then lastly, Corinne, who to date is the only person who's pronounced my last name correctly. It's lovely to be here with a French person hosting, has asked me to end with something constructive and positive. So I've included something of a vision for the future, for connections between culture and business, and why I think we're on the cusp of a very exciting purple patch for partnerships here in Australia. So part number one, good art does equal good business. It's a statement of truth. It's cost effective, it's a mutually beneficial way to enable culture. At best, partnerships raise the brand value of both parties and reinforce their heritage and their visions for the future. There is the business of turning the arts into brands. I think the era of seeing the artist as victim of a rapacious corporate beast is over. Artists and culture makers are becoming increasingly savvy at borrowing the best from marketing to build their own brands, manage their own voice, and cut through the noise. The business world, desirous of all of the creativity, authenticity, edginess that the arts represent, are busily feeding themselves however they can. There has never been such a fertile time for collaboration, blurred lines, and subverting of the old power dynamics. Here is the one footnote to the rabbit hole that we didn't want to go down. What does make good art today? Is the metric engagement? Is it popularity? Did it deliver a moment of brutal insight, a respite from the noise? Is it profitable? Is it sustainable? Is it meaningful? Is it authentic? It's a very long speech, best done with a glass of wine and two parties rather than me talking at you, so we'll save it for later. The last in this definitional exercise about good was to explore what the idea of good business means today. Good business is the kind that you want to partner with. They are certainly profitable, they need to be, but they are also likeable, creative, innovative, energetic, purpose-driven, responsible, sustainable, the kinds of places that you would want to work for if you weren't working in the arts. Because these days the money is not enough. The iceberg of all of these intangibles that David described and all of the others that I've just talked about above can give all of that sits above the water its stability, but it also has the potential to still sink the Titanic. So there's a lot of food for thought in those definitions of good art being good business, but I want to move on to the future. Because from where I am standing, it seems to me that we're looking at a future where objects are less important, experiences are less physical, spaces and how we define them are being reconstituted, our institutions carry less authority, and we are on the cusp of a new era of a bottom-up power dynamic. Our cultural experience is being disaggregated. We're having to wrap our heads around how to deliver niche at scale with interest being relational rather than being driven by geographic proximity. Content is everywhere. Delivery models are in crisis. The financial model for culture is being disrupted. And the immediate future is an arts landscape being rebuilt on micropayments, on fan bases, on self-financed projects. But how we, as the industry and the institutions that work within the industry, make that scale and how we figure out how to make that pay is still very much an open question. Excitingly, it seems like the trend is towards radical transparency in funding systems, in the operations of our organisations, and in the process of creation itself. The line between maker and audience is being rewritten, and our creative worlds are driven by collaboration, co-creation, and the end of the image of the lone artist in his ivory tower. So if that's the backdrop to a cultural world that we are entering, what are the trends that are having a big impact on the partnership landscape being navigated here and now? Thank goodness for Innovation 2.0. Malcolm's ideas boom has given the word innovation, that was starting to sound a little bit like a cliche, a bit of a retread. And we're very grateful for that at TEDx Sydney. But I have a feeling that time might be ticking. But for now, the bleeding edge has never felt so very mainstream. The best news is what happens after peak innovation, Already there is this management fetishising of creativity going on that is wonderful for the ability of the cultural sector to build partnerships based on its inherent qualities, perhaps for the first time. Partnerships not built on advertising space rates or bed nights, on ideas of luxury or money can't buy experiences beyond opening nights, good washing, greenwashing, brand activations and merchandise. But partnerships built on getting under the skin of what it means to be creative, about being uncomfortable, about being curious and non-conformist. If we're ready for it, it will be a boon for the cultural sector to be able to sell living on the edge, the sort of living on the edge David described. So the focus on creativity is also taking place throughout the adjacent industries. The cultural industries are seeing a seething mass of converging hybrids. You find advertising agencies trying to figure out how to be newsrooms. The rise of branded content has seen our newsrooms trying to figure out how to be agencies. Our historical institutions are abandoning history and trying to figure out how to package the here for now. Artists are trying to work out how to be businesses, management consultants are trying to work out how to be designers, and the worlds of art and commerce have never been so intermingled. The disruption at play in the creative industries, this merging and cleansing process, is being accelerated and aided by the strong anti-commercial bias of younger generations who are not seduced by old ideas of cool generated by brands on their behalf. Young Gen Ys and Gen Zs see codified, commodified and aspirational coolness as a straitjacket for creativity. The geeks that now rule the world are far more concerned with making things real than making them cool. And so we will all have to considerably adjust the way that we deliver cultural experiences and brand experiences for them. So the future is going to be disaggregated, niche, transparent, online, self-financed and user pays, and the current climate is being shaped by the macro trends of an innovation boom being reborn, the businessman as artist, disruption and convergence in our creative industries, and the emergence of a generation inoculated against cool. So our next model of art support will have to work out how to make that scalable, commodifiable and commercialised. At TEDx Sydney, the partners and prospects that I deal with are looking post-innovation 2.0, and so I think they provide some tea leaf reading opportunities. And so the list here are how some of these broader forces are playing out in the programs and architectures we are creating to entice their support in this new landscape. For large corporates, the challenge of attracting the best and brightest when they would rather join a startup or save the world than earn the big bucks is considerable. Partnerships paid for from human resources budgets rather than marketing budgets are relatively new. Marketers tasked with HR briefs seem to be even newer. Content is both a byproduct and the best answer for the niche at scale and disaggregated artistic production trends. And its dominance is why the media and the creative industries are collapsing in on themselves. Our partnerships at TEDx Sydney have switched from being attendees first strategies in a tiny 2-year timeframe. We now start wide with content and work our way back down to what that feels like at the live event. Our communities hold incredibly principled stances on corporate misbehaviour, and they expect the partnerships that we make to reflect our values and theirs. Navigating these expectations is tricky, certainly without compromising your revenue base, but compromising your brand is worse. As a result of this dominance of this content-first strategy, we're finding that this year has represented a real tipping point for brand activations. Where money-intensive things constructed at events are really struggling to shape up to new return on investment criteria. Similarly, merchandise, even of the high-quality collectible TED type, which used to be a mainstay of partnerships, is now being looked over, not by our audiences, but by our partners. Partnerships are being used to build staff engagement as a strategic tool for leadership development and as a way to inspire a culture of entrepreneurship within businesses. I don't know if you've noticed, but everybody is obsessed with startups and the SME business sector as the powerhouse of the new economy. Partnerships are a great way to make large corporates porous to smaller businesses, to collaborate with them, to learn from them, to suck up some of their energy and optimism. Find any way that you can to make your organisation the platform for those connections to take place. Those of us that work in the arts know that culture makes the difference between a boring place and a place that you would like to be. And the property industry knows it too, and are increasingly investing in the arts as a way to create texture and interest and increase the value of their holdings. And lastly, while a minority trend in previous years, this year partnerships at TEDx Sydney are dominated by maker projects, research, co-creation, A/B campaign testing. By inviting the community to participate in cooperative exercises, we're capitalising on many of the macro trends I've talked about and creating a whole new partnership architecture that is driven by making real things rather than by making things cool. So Corinne asked me to leave you with a sense of optimism and possibility for the future. This wasn't too hard at all. It's my nature, and I truly believe the best is yet to come for making good art equal good business. Our jobs in brokering partnerships between the arts and its enablers is a noble one, and the following 5 slides give me purpose and meaning in what I do. David pointed me to this definition by Brian Eno, that art is everything you do when you don't have to do. I prefer it to the Andy Warhol one and have adopted it wholeheartedly. The previous era has seen the value of art talked about in everybody else's metrics as the cultural community has floundered to defend an art for art's sake position. The value of art is not in the Bill Bauer effect or in alternative investment portfolios. It's not in education or in health, in beds nights or as a tool for second-guessing hipsters. The sooner we articulate to partners the boundary writing, sense-making and enigma-creating value of art with the confidence of those that have the keys to the future, the better. Reclaim authenticity. I don't know about you, but I feel like we have lost authenticity's pulse. We all know it when we feel it, we recoil when we see its opposite. But marketing has tried to colonise the idea of authenticity, and I think that it's time for the arts to claim it back as one of our most valuable intangible qualities. And once we've done that, I'm very happy to repackage it and sell it back at twice the price. I'm also really excited about how this new era enables portfolio careers for creatives. I love that this intermingling of arts and business has opened up a whole new world of possibilities for creative careers. A chance to pay the bills with our skills and to manage a multifaceted artistic brand. Selling out is definitely over and selling in is here to stay. So from Innovation 2.0, the ideas boom, all of this will morph into a period of time where creativity will be the most highly prized attribute. I think there is cause for much optimism for a future with the arts at its centre. Perhaps one of the last skills to be able to be automated and the most enjoyable pastime when there are no jobs left to be done. And in a time of great change, the qualities that separate a poem written by an algorithm from one written from lived human experience may become harder to discern, but will become all the more valuable and precious to us. Thank you so much.
Thank you to all of you. That was really interesting. I mean, it's the question of return of investment is obviously really key for us. And I thought it was really interesting to hear you, David, about the difference between economic impact and iconic impact. And obviously it's huge. You talk about 4.6 billion for the Opera House, so that was huge. So now, I mean, we know that when a sponsor is doing a check to us, I mean, nowadays the return on investment is even bigger than before. So it's great when you are the Opera House, but when you are a small museum or a small theatre, how do you value, how do you measure this economic and iconic impact? Is it the same process? Is it the same formula that you apply?
I think the same formulas can be applied, but I mean, if you simplify it to where the ambassador was talking about brand value and the way brands actually work, we know that businesses need to progress and they need to evolve to differentiate themselves from their competition, and they need ideas to actually stake out the second and third horizons of their existence. In classic brand terms, I think Damien Borchuk's here, who introduced me to you, you know, a brand to survive, to be healthy, needs to be both differentiated and relevant. But as you buy into it on a personal basis, you become more familiar with it. And if it delivers and continues to deliver on its promise, you become very familiar with it. The paradox is, once you're familiar with it, it's no longer differentiated, and therefore it's susceptible, vulnerable to a new interloper. So the value of creativity through sponsorships, associations, or the ideas that arts institutions can bring into business have a lot to do with the continual refreshing, reinvigorating, and redifferentiation of businesses. That's the imperative of business to stay alive. A healthy business is always progressing, and the best ideas come from creatives.
Okay, so you always have to think about reinventing yourself and to differentiate yourself.
I think so.
Yes.
Yeah.
Kate, thank you very much for this inspiring talk. And I mean, I see that sitting from your garden can give you a lot of ideas. So that was really interesting to see how far you can go. So, I mean, you showed a lot of explanation, but is there a formula to do a return on investment? And what would be your best advice to do that?
In very pragmatic terms, return on investment really depend on what the partner is looking for in the first place. And at a very basic level, one of the first screening questions I'm always asking is, are we looking for reach or are we looking for depth? And that really will split the crowd in half for the most part. And the sort of campaigns, the sort of things that we design for organisations that are looking for reach are really driven by writing a very long tail of association with the content that TEDx Sydney produces, for example. But if people are looking for depth, if they're looking for ideas, if they're looking for ways to make their organisations porous to this sort of energy that's coming out of the creative industries, but also the startup space, then they need to be very tactile, hands-on experiences. They really need to be about getting into ideas in this sort of co-creation space. So yeah, I think we're dealing with quite divergent trends, but the era of return on investment being driven by those base units of logo exposures or brand encounters seems to me to be passing, and hallelujah.
Yes, we're very much into experience economy now, where you have to measure that. So that's obviously very difficult. David, do you have a question to Kate?
Yeah, I mean, the term victim mentality was really intriguing to me for arts institutions, and given that we accept business needs art more than ever, you know, that's my position. You know, to be different from the competition, to stimulate its own ideas, to progress. You know, how do we actually shift that that sense of self-value and help the arts articulate much more tangibly the impact of authentic, original ideas?
Yeah, look, I'm so split, and I've gone round and round in circles as David and I have spoken in the lead up to this talk. In the one sense, it is absolutely amazing to do a valuation of something like the Opera House and to blow out of the water the economic metrics so that people in business can start thinking about valuations starting in the billions of dollars rather than starting in the hundreds of millions. I think that's so important. But once you start breaking it down, as you suggested, Corinne, into small organisations and the rest of the arts landscape, I think we would find ourselves trapped in that same rabbit hole of trying to demonstrate our worth in economic terms all of the time. And I would much rather really ride this current wave where business is starting to get that the exotic and that the special and that the inherent qualities of being creative is the thing that they are really desirous of, and that it's going to be very hard to be able to wrap an economic value around that. And again, I think that as soon as we can make that a strength and to change the language in a lot of ways, and I think that the power dynamic between the creative industry and the business sector is really shifting to a very level playing field when you start listening to musicians talking about their interactions with brands and things like that, and brands are starting to sound like they're the victims in the negotiations with musicians and artists, and I think there's a long way to go for the rest of the creative industry to catch up until it's a much more level playing field.
Much more to go further.
Yeah, I think so.
I would like, I mean, we are quite limited on time, so I would like to wrap up what you've said about, you know, good business and good art is good business. If we can finish with one key learning for each of you, what would it be?
Oh, You go
not
first.
to
Me. I hadn't thought of one, but I mean, thinking about your point about the fetishization of creativity in popular media, in business and so forth, my point of view is you can't delineate it that cleanly between authenticity and what's not authentic. You know, I once spoke to Peter Carey, the writer. I said, how do you become a great novelist? And he said, write anything. Write trash, write emails, write, you know. The craft is 95% of the great art, and you learn to channel it. So I tend to think of value of arts and the relevance of arts in the business landscape as more of a continuum. You don't sell out so much. You have to adapt. You have to meet halfway, because business is looking to come more than halfway to the arts for their own benefit. Naked self-interest will drive the adaptation of an arts organisation to make it relevant, meaningful and valuable to a business.
So what is a key learning of that?
Be flexible.
Okay, thank you.
I think mine is be porous.
Yes.
I think figure out ways to make your organisation something that both creative industries and business at small levels and at large levels can come in and through. And the old eras of institutions and agents as gatekeepers, these sort of things are really collapsing, and the faster that you can make your organisation a platform for those conversations, the better.
So the key learning?
Be porous.
Be porous. Okay.
Be porous.
Thank you very much, both of you.
Thank you.
For this great
Thank you,
first introduction.